The BizNews Power Hour.
Welcome to the BizNews Power Hour, where we give you the rational perspective on business news that matters. Well, it's Wednesday, the 18th of August, and a very interesting program we've got coming up for you. It seems as though the mainstream media has given up on the whole Cape Independence story, and every Cape Independence person is contacting BizNews to say, "Hey, people want to break away in the Western Cape." Well, it'll be interesting what you think of the interview that I had today with Jack Miller. It's coming up a little bit later. That's the Cape Party, which, Stuart, has now become the Cape Independence Party. I know you watched it because we pre-recorded the interview, and I know that you felt that 37-year-old Jack Miller might not be the next president of the Cape, but he's going to be a power broker.
No, I agree completely, Alec. I think he says the right things. I think he speaks for a lot of people and what people are thinking as well. So, and also with the idea of Cape Independence, I think if you look at mainstream media, who does it benefit as well? And I think that's why you see who covers it and who doesn't. But I think it's a fascinating story. I mean, you've seen Brexit. I know it's not the same thing, but it's a similar concept. And people want the this freedom to make decisions that makes things better for themselves.
And for the economy. Yep. Interestingly, with Brexit, we are seeing a number of little wins that are going through. We were talking in the editorial meeting at BizNews this morning about the factory.
British Volt in a battery factory in the UK, and Glencore's just obviously put some money into it, invested into it with their supply of cobalt. And I think it's one of a few decisions lately that has gone well for the UK with regards to investment. Because I see Boris Johnson himself is also investing in these manufacturing plants. I think 1 billion was the number that was in that story. So
probably not Boris, but maybe the British government. Yeah. but what has been interesting is the biggest series ever. Up until now, the biggest series was Game of Thrones. But now the biggest series ever that is being done by Amazon is going to be switched from New Zealand, or the production thereof, to Britain, because New Zealand, according to Amazon, haven't really done terribly well with the way they've handled the coronavirus. As you know, they had one case, and so they closed the whole country down again. And Britain, with Brexit, would have offered a better deal. And I guess that's also what is motivating people in the Western Cape to say, hang on, we want to have our own market-related policies, etc. It's such an interesting story, and one that the Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, is camped completely against. But it seems as though he might be nudged towards having a referendum if there's a different outcome in the municipal elections, which is important. And as you'll hear from Jack Miller, he says their intention is only to get about 5% of the vote, but then they'll be the power broker. Then they can swing it and force the DA to call a referendum, and the people of the Western Cape can then decide on their future. It's, maybe it's an idea whose time has come.
There's also a big shift to the community. Like if you look at interests, you can't sort of paint one country with one brush. You need to have different elements for different areas. And that's why there's a big focus on provincial and municipal elections to create these units that actually look after the people in these little communities. And I think that's a big thing that'll come with the Cape sort of independence discussion, is what works for this area of the country with its people, etc. So I think it's fascinating.
Well, that's our managing editor, Stuart Lohman. I'm Alec Hogg, and I'd love to just put our two colleagues from the Cape on the spot. Nadia Swat's in our virtual studio. Nadia, would you vote for Cape independence?
100%. I definitely would.
And Justin Robert? Sorry, Nat?
Yeah, I think that would be the thing that needs to happen for the rest of my family in Gauteng to move here.
Then, okay. So you got a bit of an ulterior motive to it. And Justin?
Alec, as a born and bred Cape Townian who's been in Joburg for years, I've seen both the Western Cape and Gauteng, and just the mismanagement in Gauteng versus how your taxes And those sort of finances are looked after more so in the Western Cape. And as a result, yes, I would be in favor of Cape independence.
Okay, all right. Well, this isn't a political kind of poll, but it just shows you that there is on the ground, and including amongst young people, our colleagues who are looking at it, and that's what Jack Miller's going for. He's saying, just talk to the young people, and the young people need hope. And if they can see an incredibly exciting future, the one that he perceives as Cape Independence, with the Cape Independence Party. But it's a great interview, and it's coming up in just a little while. Also today, we've got Magnus Haystick. We'll be talking to him in a little while. He's going to be focusing on something completely different, on whether or not you should be buying a retirement annuity. No prizes for knowing why not. And then why he thinks you should not be doing so. And then, Nadia, you had an interview with a managing director of FNB a little later today, Jacques Soulier. That's coming up later in the show.
Yes, no, it was great. We discussed the topic of brain drain, which is very relevant at the moment.
What
It's a
I
good
liked was your
interview.
opening question, where you actually asked him his background. He's not a banker. He didn't actually start as a
Engineering.
waste clerk. Yeah,
Yeah, it was
engineering.
very interesting. So it sort of actually stands for what he said in the interview, that they want people from all spheres to work in banking, and that is possible now.
And Justin, your interview tonight was with the CEO of A2X on a day when the JSE's biggest competitor would have been smiling when the JSE was actually grinding to a halt.
Exactly. And what came out of that interview was it just underscores the need for competition, Alec. The JSE is they run as a somewhat monopoly in this country. And when events like today happens after their biggest day ever yesterday, beating their record by almost twice, the BDA systems, which are more than 30 years old, collapsed. And yes, as I said, it just underscores the need for competition in this country.
Indeed, it does. We've got all of that coming up in the program. But before we get there, Stuart, what are the BizNews community reading on the website today?
Well, Alec, the big one, Nimola. I'm not sure the FMR community knows about Nimola, but we published a couple open letters written by Nimola, nameless and sort of faceless in a sense from where it comes from. But it's the 3.0, his third, his or her here, his third edition.
Their third edition.
Their third edition, which looks at the cabinet reshuffle and just basically sums it up. So it was a car with 4 flat tires. There's sort of no replacement. You couldn't replace all 4 tires. You know, you're going to go one in the back. And then he talks about some of the cabinet mistakes.
Did not say he, because how do you know it isn't a she? And I'll just have you know that nobody outside of my little PC, my little laptop knows who Nimola is. And Nimola has said the reason they need to remain completely anonymous is their position is of a relatively high profile. And as a consequence, if anyone knew who Nimola was, certainly the person would be judged. But secondly, it would be could be difficult for them to earn a living in the future if that were the case. So let's not say he or she, just Nimola. Just call it Nimola. Yeah. So it's our anonymous correspondent.
I like that.
Okay, so that's the top read story today. I think, Nadia, you're going to have to do one of your reads of Nimola as you've done in the first two. They've been incredibly well received by the business community.
Very well. The first open letter reading was by almost threefold the highest listened to podcast on Iono in the last month.
Incredible. And then it was the actual article itself. Last I looked, for 250, 300,000 people had read it.
And the video also almost 200,000 views.
So definitely hit a very sweet spot with the community. And what else, Stu, on the site?
Another topical discussion. It's through Panda, Alec. They've written a piece on the Mail and Guardian, who wrote an article or had an opinion piece published on vaccine hesitancy and were heavily attacked by certain media outlets. And they've put together a piece looking at the funding behind these outlets that sort of broached the attack and stuff. So that's doing very well on the .com. And then we mentioned Glencore. That's also a topic of discussion that's been picked up on .com. It's also one of the lessons for South Africa on how Brexit is finding ways to bring in investments. So maybe something for South Africa to learn from.
Nadia, as far as BizNews TV on YouTube is concerned?
So on the topic of Cape Independence, one of the videos that's doing really well today is the summary of your interview with Phil Craig. From the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, in which he said that 58% of people in the Western Cape want a referendum to vote for Cape independence. And another video that's doing really well is the explainer video of the Zweli Mkhize Digital Vibes corruption scandal. And then Paula Sullivan unpacks it very nicely, the details of the affidavit. And then the third video is our flash briefing from yesterday, which just covered the news headlines and vaccine hesitancy. And
lots of interesting stuff there on BizNews TV on YouTube. Stu, podcast?
On the radio side, Alec, Herman Mashaba interview from last night on the Zambian elections, top of the pops. Stephen Nathan as well on Transnet, Zambia, and Michael Berry from The Big Short. And then last night's BPH rounds at the top three on the radio side.
The BPH is the BizNews Power Hour, which you're listening to right now. Do remember that we often take out the highlights for the show and then run the full interview. For instance, the one with Jack Miller, the one pre-recorded today, you'll hear about 10 minutes of that interview. But if you want to hear the whole thing, go onto BizNews, BizNews Radio on Spotify or iTunes, and you can get the whole half hour. Okay, coming up in a moment, the markets.
BrightRock believes that with every change in life comes opportunity, and the markets aren't any different. The daily movement in the markets mean change for us all, sometimes small, sometimes big. This daily market report is made just for you by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes. Okay, so let's start with the news headlines. Here's Nadia Swart.
Eskom is considering buying a fleet of electrically powered light delivery vehicles, according to its CEO, Andre de Ruyter. We buy hundreds of light delivery vehicles every year, and we would like to explore the opportunity to pivot the motor industry to electric vehicles by using our own demand for locally manufactured EVs to enable investment. De Ruyter said that by acting as an anchor market, Eskom could help the country's motor vehicle industry start moving from producing petrol and diesel cars and bakkies to electric ones. He did not provide further information on when Eskom would make a decision to obtain electric vehicles, how much they were expected to cost, or where they would source them from. The Eskom CEO noted that the National Association of Automobile Manufacturers of South Africa warned last year that the country's motor industry could lose 80% of its exports by 2040 as countries announced timetables to prohibit the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. National Treasury says it is working through the nuts and bolts of the planned policy changes to allow the early withdrawal of retirement savings. It said the aim is to ensure the preservation of funds so that most of the money saved for retirement is actually kept for retirement. South African households are already not saving enough, and giving too much freedom with the policy could be disastrous. Despite this, it acknowledged that there are times when emergency funds are needed, but withdrawals have to be limited. The ANC runs the risk of failing to register its candidates to contest this year's municipal elections by August 23rd IEC deadline, as staff refuse to work overtime and over the weekends due to outstanding salaries and other benefits. Party employees countrywide remain on a go slow in protest against not being paid, which means the ANC's leaders face the risk of failing to submit the names of their preferred municipal councillor candidates for the elections, which are scheduled for October 27th. Faber Potgieter, the general manager at ANC headquarters Luthuli House, has written a desperate letter to disgruntled staff, pleading with them to suspend the go slow, work extra hours, and over this weekend to help the party meet the deadline.
What an interesting turn up for the books that is. Justin Rowe Roberts has got today's market report. Justin?
The JSE All Share Index was down at 68,000. In the currency markets, the rand was weaker against all the major currencies to 14 rand 93 cents to the dollar, 55 cents to the pound, and 17 rand 49 cents to the euro. Gold is flat at $1,785 an ounce. Kruger rand will cost you around 28,000 rand. Brent crude is flat at $70 a barrel, and the premier cryptocurrency will put you back 680,000 rand. In the financial news, the start of equities trading on the JSE on South Africa's main stock exchange was delayed on Wednesday after the BOUS was unable to fully process transactions from record volumes in the previous session. Tuesday saw 145 billion rand of equities traded, which caused significant delays in processing on some systems. Trading was due to start at 9 a.m. local time, but was delayed by more than 5 hours as trade started at 2:30 p.m. Local market heavyweights Naspers dominated trading on the JSE on Tuesday, falling 8.1% in surging volumes following the completion of a restructuring and exchange transaction with Unit Process. Naspers investors were invited to swap their shares and the Cape Town-based company for processed stock. South Africa's inflation rate fell to the lowest level in 3 months in July, giving the central bank more leeway to delay raising interest rates. The Monetary Policy Committee turned less hawkish on policy normalization in its meeting last month and warned that deadly riots in the eastern KZN province and the commercial hub of Gauteng would likely slow the economic recovery. The unrest and the continued impact of the coronavirus pandemic that caused the economy to contract the most in a century last year has raised uncertainty and weighed on investor confidence. Slowing inflation could allow the central bank to keep providing support after cutting rates to a record low in 2020. Consumer prices rose 4.6% in July from a year earlier, compared with 4.9% in June. That was less than expected, and it takes it closer to the 4.5% midpoint of the central bank's target range.
This market report was made just for you by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Well, thanks for being with us this Wednesday, the 18th of August. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, from the BizNews team, cheerio.
You've been listening to the Power Hour, brought to you by the team at BizNews.